All right, let's jump right in. For centuries, we've had this really powerful way of figuring things out. If you want to understand something big and complicated, you just break it down into smaller pieces. Simple, right? But what if that very process, as brilliant as it's been, has made us lose sight of something huge? Today, we're going to talk about a massive shift in thinking, about how we're starting to put our fragmented world back together again. And it all kicks off with this wild idea. The universe isn't just a bunch of separate things floating around. No, it's one single vast connected entity, a hypersystem. Think about that. Everything is connected to everything else. Now, that's not just some nice poetic thought. It's a whole new framework for understanding, well, literally everything. Okay, so if the universe is this one giant interconnected thing, how on earth did we ever make sense of any of it? Well, it turns out we came up with a really specific and, a very human tool to get the job done. And that tool has a name: reductionism. It's that basic instinct we all have. You see a complex problem, doesn't matter if it's a car engine or the entire cosmos, and your first thought is to take it apart. Figure out the little pieces, see how they work, and boom, you'll understand the whole thing. It just makes sense, right? It's a totally natural way to approach the unknown.
This is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Astronomers don't try to swallow the whole universe in one bite. Of course not. They break it down. You study the galaxies, then you zoom in on the star systems inside them, then you zoom in again to the planets. You just keep zooming in, making the picture simpler and more manageable at every single step. And let's be super clear here. This method has been unbelievably successful. I mean, from physics to biology, reductionism has been the engine of discovery for centuries. It's an incredibly powerful way to get answers. But, and this is a big but, that power comes with a kind of a hidden danger. Because this tool worked so well, it actually created an intellectual blind spot, a hidden trap in our own thinking that for the longest time we didn't even realize was there.
So here's the deal. The goal was always to use the parts to understand the whole thing. But the trap is that we forget why we started. We get so obsessed with the individual puzzle pieces that we completely lose sight of the final picture. We end up mistaking our simplified analysis, the map, for the real messy, complex world. And this is exactly where we got caught. We started acting like our simplified models, all those disassembled parts, were the actual reality. The source material uses this great word, hypothesized. It's a fancy term, but all it means is we took our fragmented picture and treated it as the real thing. We forgot we were just looking at a map and started believing the map was the territory. And now, when you look at the biggest challenges we're facing, things like climate change or even just understanding how our own brains work, that fragmented view just isn't cutting it anymore. The really hard problems are all about the connections between things, not just the things themselves. This old game is running out of steam. So this brings us to the next phase, the next step in our evolution of thought. And it's not about throwing away our old tools. It's about adding a new, absolutely crucial final step, putting all the pieces back together. What we're seeing is this really fundamental shift happening. A move away from seeing the world as just a collection of separate, broken apart objects, and a move toward what the source calls a systems view. And in this new view, the relationships between the parts are just as important as the parts themselves. In fact, maybe even more so. So what does that actually mean, to think in systems? Well, it means you can't just study something in a vacuum anymore. You have to look at its environment. You have to track how it interacts with other systems around it, the constant flow of energy and information going in and out. And the most important takeaway is this: you can never, ever truly understand a part in isolation. It just doesn't work. And this sets a brand new ground rule for how we think about knowledge itself. From now on, every theory, every model, every analysis has to come with a little asterisk next to it. It has to admit that it's just a simplification, that it's only a partial view of a much bigger, more complicated, interconnected reality. And listen, this isn't just some small tweak for scientists. This idea of systems thinking is completely redrawing the entire map of human knowledge. This leads to a conclusion that is, well, it's pretty radical. The old dream of finding one single fundamental field of study, like physics, that could explain everything else, that whole idea is collapsing. It's over. The old map of knowledge was basically a pyramid, right? With all the different fields of study competing to be at the very top. But the new map, it's more like an ecosystem. Physics, biology, sociology, even art, they're all different for sure, but they interact with each other. They inform each other. They depend on one another. There's no longer one fundamental truth, but a whole web of interconnected truths. This leaves us with a beautiful, kind of mind-bending paradox. Every single system, whether it's a tiny cell or an entire society, is two things at the exact same time. It's closed, meaning it has its own identity, its own integrity, but it's also open because it's completely integrated with and dependent on its environment to even exist. And those two things aren't a contradiction, they're two sides of the same coin. So I want to leave you with this question. If it's true, if everything really is connected in this massive hypersystem, how do we ever get anything done? To solve any problem, you have to simplify. So where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the boundary between the system we're trying to fix and, well, everything else? That is the great challenge and maybe the greatest opportunity of this new way of seeing the world.